according to this, I still have an unresolved value from an invocation. So that means I have to carry out the other invocation, which is actually the outer invocation in the original code. Okay? Well, at this point, column C is deallocated, so is column D. So that means I can reuse column C and column D for the return info that I need to invoke S2 and also for parameter n for invoking S2. Because the action I am performing is C6, that means when I get back from this invocation, I will still be going back to line 9 because the print has not occurred yet. However, the invocation itself should be resolved to a single value at that point, and that's why the invocation is replaced by a single question mark. Any questions at this point? Yes?
Shouldn't it be the question mark times 1 goes to n? Because we haven't actually performed the function, we're just doing the second invocation. It's like when we do the addition one, we still leave the 4 plus question mark.
Well, but there's nothing...
We found the value already.
Because the first invocation resolved the question mark, or it resolved the argument to n of the outer invocation. And the second time, yeah, go ahead.
That's the inner invocation. Because we have invoke on line 4, we have invoke S2 question mark goes to n. That question mark represents the inner invocation. So now we're doing the outer invocation.
Right.
Shouldn't that one still remain?
Well, okay, this is what we're trying to do. This is the line that this represents the line that we are executing at this point. Right?
Right.
So in order to finish the print operation, I have to find out what value S2 is returning when I invoke it.
Right.
In other words, I am invoking S2 the way it is specified here, and that's why that invocation is replaced by a question mark.
Right, I understand replacing the invocation, but we still have to multiply that invocation of S2 by 1.
But there's no multiplication in the original code. There's no multiplication ever, anywhere.
It's implied when you say the invocation of S2 multiplied by another invocation of S2 because it's inside that invocation.
The inner invocation doesn't do anything other than to specify the parameter n for the outer invocation. There's no multiplication. They're not multiplied.
I thought it was like f of n, like the function of n. And
This is kind of like f of n. Okay, if you look at S2 as a function, as a math function, okay, then it is basically, we're trying to calculate what is S2 applied to S2 applied to 0 in this case. Okay, so that's why we have to invoke S2 the first time to make sure to return a value of 1, and now we are trying to calculate what is S2 applied to 1.
Right.
So if you look at it from the math perspective, this is what it looks like.
Okay.
Except in the programming perspective, it looks just a lot more cumbersome, but it is exactly the same concept, the same idea.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we set up n to be 1 this time because we are executing the statement as described by C6, the cell C6. And once we set up the columns, we go back into the subroutine starting on line 3. Okay, it is important to remember we have to go start on line 3. N equals 0 this time is false because n has a value of 1. That means I cannot move on to line 4. I have to move on to line 6. Okay, it's not a big deal. On line 6, we are going to return 1 plus the result of invoking S2, but this time with n minus 1 as the argument to parameter n. That means I have to invoke S2 again. Since I have already allocated column C and column D at this point, I cannot reuse the same 2 columns. I have to use column E and column F this time. Every time I invoke S2, I need 1 column for return info and 1 column for parameter n. Let's deal with n first. To specify n, the argument is n minus 1. The n of the n minus 1 is specifying column D, which has a value of 1 at this point. 1 minus 1 is 0. And then the return info is basically telling me what else I have to do when I'm done and get back onto this line. So I have to say that we have to get back onto line 6. The return has not occurred yet. The addition has not occurred yet, but the invocation should have resolved to a particular value at that time. And that's why the invocation is replaced by a question mark, just like that. Once we set up column E and column F, we can go back to the beginning of the subroutine again, starting on line 3. So once again, we check whether n equals to 0, and this time it is true, because n does equal to 0 according to column F. Then we move on to line 4, because the condition is true. We are going to return 1. Return 1 is going to copy, paste, change the question mark to a 1. But we do not simplify anything, we do not perform any calculations at this point, we just do the substitution. After line 4, we get out of the conditional statement. We arrive at line 8. Line 8 is the end of the subroutine. We just have to deallocate everything that we allocated for this invocation. And then we have to continue execution based on return info. Return info tells me that I should go back to line 6. Not only that, when I get back to line 6, it is already resolved. There are no invocations anymore to perform. In other words, I just have to perform return 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. I am going to perform the return action itself, returning a value of 2. When I return 2, I have to locate the rightmost return info cell, which is column C, copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value that I'm returning, which is 2 in this case, and I'm done with the execution of line 6, the return action itself. After line 6, there are no more things to do. There's no more thing to do inside the conditional statement. I get out of the conditional statement. I go to line 8. Line 8 is going to deallocate all the columns that we allocated for this invocation, just like last time. And then we continue execution on line 9, because that's what the return info is telling me, is to go back to line 9. When I do go back to line 9 on row 18 of the trace, line 9 looks like C16 at this point. There are no additional invocations necessary, everything is already done, so I just have to perform the actual print action to print a value of 2, and then I go to post, and this is all done. So this is actually one of the simpler traces, even though it looks kind of nasty. It looks nasty because of line 9, because we have one invocation inside another invocation. But if you think about it, you just have to use the ordering to invoke one first, resolve what value it is, use it to specify the parameter of the outer invocation, and then the subroutine itself is actually fairly easy because you only have one invocation on the return line anyway in this case. Are there any questions about FX2? No questions? Okay. Let me save it, and then we'll move on to question number 4. And just to illustrate how to take the exam again, because only 7 people have tried it, I am kind of worried about the other 22, 23 students. So what you do is, when you're all done, you turn in your file, just like with the homework assignment. You go to the folder where the file is, so that means you have to remember where you put the file, and then you double-click that file, and then at this point, you can either click Save Without Submitting, which will upload the file, or you can also click the other question, which will also upload the file. However, if you click these buttons up here, it will not upload the file. So you got to be careful which button you're clicking after this. I would personally just click Save Without Submitting and then hit the other question, just to be sure that the file is uploaded. Okay, so just go ahead and click Save Without Submitting. Make sure you see the answer has a link to the file itself, then you're done. Okay, then you can move on to another question, say question 4 in this case. Question 4, out of the 5 questions, 4 will be traces. Okay, only 1 is going to be a pre and post condition. Have we talked about this one? No? Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this one. I think this is the last one of all 5 questions. Okay. So when you look at this question, it looks kind of long. It's longer than the other questions, but it really is not difficult. This one, once you know how to pass an array by reference, that's the only thing that is stopping you from tracing this particular sample code. Okay. Let's go ahead and trace it, and then you guys can ask questions during the trace. I think there's only one point where people may have questions about this particular pseudocode. Okay. When you go to sheet 2, in this case, it is already pre-initialized because you have to start with an array, and in this case, the array has to be initialized because all we are doing is comparing elements of the array, so it has to be initialized. Otherwise, you cannot tell which one is bigger and which one is smaller. And not only that, I also tell you that B has 5 elements, so bar B bar is 5. Okay.
It's not sorted, though.
It is not sorted, correct. All right, so now we begin execution at line 15. Line 15 is going to try to print the result of the invocation. So that means I have to invoke first before I can actually find out what value I'm supposed to print. Okay. Whenever I invoke S4, there are several columns I have to set up. How many columns do I need in this case? I need 1 for return info because I have to remember where to go back to. That's the purpose of the return info column. I need 1 for each parameter and each local variable. Now this is kind of a unique case because we have all 3 cases. We have 1 by ref parameter, we have 1 by val parameter, and we have 1 local variable. Each one will take up 1 column. A takes up 1, I takes up 1, X takes up 1. X is the really easy one because it is a local variable. It has to start with an unknown value. When I graded the homework assignment, the last homework assignment, several people forgot that K in that homework assignment is a local variable, and therefore it should start with a question mark and not 0, instantly. So that is important because, I know it sounds like nitpicking, but when you move on to a C class, the C++ compiler won't be nitpicking as nitpicking as I will be, or as I am, and as a result, your program will not work correctly sometimes, depending on what that question mark is. So it is very important in this class to remember local variables always start with an unknown value. Parameter I, which is passed by value, is also pretty easy because we can see here that we are passing a value of 2 to I. Okay, that's 2. And parameter A is the only thing that is an extension of what we have talked about. We know about arrays. Okay, B is an array. We know about arrays. We know about passing by reference because a by ref parameter is a reference to another column. In this case, we just have to extend that concept, so now it is a reference to other columns. Okay, multiple columns. In other words, A as a parameter is an alias of columns C all the way to column G. Okay, that's the only difference between this type of passing by reference and from the usual pass by reference. It's not an alias of a single column, it is an alias of multiple columns. Return info is easy in this case because there's nothing else to do except to print out the return value. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. If there are no questions, we'll go ahead and trace this. The rest is really just busy work. I mean, there's really not much else about this question.